Narcissism isn't the same as just being an asshole, right? Narcissism is a specific constellation of traits and symptoms, and that doesn't just mean being a jerk.
Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to make a couple disclaimers. This show does cover a wide variety of topics related to mental health and life in general, and some of those could be sensitive for you. I want to simultaneously encourage you to be brave in consuming difficult content, but also respect and recognize your limitations. So please use your best judgment. I will never be offended if you need to skip a question or an episode entirely, but feel free to feel it out, check out the episode, and just see what happens. If you need to skip, that's okay, but feel free to give it a shot first. I also need to say that while I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist, and I'm not your therapist. This is not intended to be direct medical advice, and you should not use this as a substitute for professional help. So with those said, let's go ahead and get into the show.
All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, episode 349. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, aka Duff the Psych. I make mental health content for real people just like you. And today I have a question and answer episode. I have two really good questions here. Nothing too intense on the trauma/triggers front. But yeah, two really great questions from listeners like yourselves. If you would like to send me a question for a future episode of the show, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com or go to duffthepsych.com and use the contact form there. As I mentioned before, the website is back up and running, but it is sort of a work in progress. So if you come across anything that's broken on the website or anything that you can't find, please let me know. We're continuing to adjust it as time goes on. We've kind of had to rebuild it from the ground up. But yeah, please send me in your questions. I really appreciate them. I like having a good, nice backlog of questions so that I can always have variety for the show. And so I do need more questions in. So be sure to send them in if there's anything you've been curious about asking about. I also wanted to remind you to please review the show, to share it, to do anything you can to support it because it makes a huge difference for me. I spend a lot of time each week outlining and doing all the stuff that goes along with recording, editing, and uploading and promoting a podcast. So it would mean the world to me if you could give back a little bit by, as I said, sharing it, reviewing it, telling somebody in your life about it, or letting me know your own feedback about it. Any of these things are helpful. So I appreciate you and thank you in advance for that. Let's go ahead and get into the questions. I don't have too much preamble here. Here's the first one. It reads, I've been with my boyfriend for over 10 years now. He's loving, caring, a great provider. We have a great sex life. A lot of backstory about how we met. He cheated on his wife and I cheated on my husband when we got together. We lived happily ever after, except for I think he's a narcissist. And I know that he's a compulsive liar. He was in a car accident when he was 17 that nearly killed him, in which he suffered physical injuries as well as a TBI, or traumatic brain injury. He functions completely normal except for a slight limp. I feel like his brain stopped developing at 17, and his reactions to things are that of a teenager. He lies about everything from major things like co-signing on a mortgage with his ex-wife unbeknownst to me, or small things like what he had for lunch. As I'm preparing for dinner, I will say to him, did you get a big lunch or what did you have for lunch, to not repeat the same thing at dinner. He's looked me straight in the face and said, I've had nothing for lunch. I've had nothing to eat all day. Only for me to find out days later that he would have had 1 or 2 slices of pizza at lunch. He will again look me straight in the face and say, yeah, I only had 1 slice of pizza. That's nothing. I feel like I'm talking to a child. His favorite thing to say is, what's the difference? To which my reaction is, having a slice of pizza is having a slice of pizza. Having nothing is having nothing. That's the difference. My issue is, why is he lying? And if he's lying about something as irrelevant as what he ate for lunch, he must be lying about a million other things too. When he says he loves me, when he says I'm beautiful, when he tells me I'm wonderful, is that all a lie too? I'm 55 and he's 59 years old. We're not kids and I feel like I shouldn't be going through this at this stage of my life. How on earth can this behavior be changed? If it can't, how do I live with it? The gaslighting and lying makes me feel like I'm the one that's fucking crazy. Thanks. Thank you. Good question. Thank you for writing in. I think that there is some very interesting stuff here and I'd like to dig into it. And it also sounds like something that you've been really struggling with. So I'm sorry you've been feeling so overwhelmed and sort of thrown off kilter by it all. I first want to say that I appreciate you sharing your backstory about both of you already having partners when you got together. I'm sure that's something that you may get mixed reactions to. Personally, I try not to judge people that step outside of their relationships because I don't know the circumstances. It's very easy to say, oh, cheating is bad no matter what. There's always another way. But I've certainly known people that have had an affair within the context of, say, an abusive relationship that they couldn't get out of safely, or one that was very bad, unsatisfying, unhealthy in some way. And this was just the best option they had to get their needs met and, make sure that they are being treated fairly and safely. And if that's the case, I can't fault someone for that. If you guys were both consenting adults and you were stepping outside of a bad or unsatisfying relationship that ultimately ended, then it could have been for the best. However, given the context of this question and your concerns about your boyfriend's habit of lying, it does give me a little pause, right? Hearing about, okay, the issue here is that he compulsively lies, and then you saying we got together when we were both already with other partners. That makes me wonder, okay, is this a pattern? Was lying and deceit a big part of his prior relationship? Is there a long history of cheating here? Or was this just a special circumstance? I think that there are situations that look like what you're describing where you're both basically getting away from bad circumstances, finding something better together, and that's why the sort of cheating or infidelity, whatever you want to call it, occurs. And there are other ones where, one person falls for another. They are sort of brought along on this journey of infidelity and then sort of pressured to leave their partner. And they expect the other person who encouraged the cheating to eventually change and stop cheating as much. And that just never happens. So it can be, it really depends. Now, another thing I want to address before giving you direct advice is you throw out the term narcissism. You said that he is a narcissist. And I'm curious about that. A lot of people don't really know what they mean when they say narcissist. It's thrown around a whole lot. Narcissistic personality disorder, which is what I'll kind of go off of in terms of describing what narcissism is considered to be rare. There's a variety of estimates, but a lot of them put it at about maybe 1% of the population, which is certainly not the picture you would get when you look at TikTok or Instagram, when it's just basically like narcissism, covert narcissism, narcissist, that. It's everywhere. You would think that like 25% of the population is narcissists. And that's just not the case. Now, that said, as with any personality dimension, you can have elements of it. You can have characteristics of it without having, a full-blown personality disorder. Everybody has a degree of narcissism, just as everybody has a degree of agreeableness, or they might be more introverted or extroverted. Everybody has, a little bit of these things, but depending on how much, that's when you would consider somebody to be a narcissist. And to be clear, narcissist isn't a term that's in the DSM or the ICD. These are terms that we use to describe somebody who we feel like has a lot of this. So it's very murky territory. But I want to give you the diagnostic criteria from the DSM, which is the Psychology Diagnostic Manual for narcissistic personality disorder, so you can see more about exactly what it looks like. So here it goes. The criteria are a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the following. A grandiose sense of self-importance, so for example, exaggerates achievements, talents, expects to be recognized as superior without having those sorts of achievements. Is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Believes that they are special and unique and can only be understood by or should only associate with other special or high status people. This could also be like institutions. Requires excessive admiration. Has a sense of entitlement, so unreasonable expectations, especially favorable treatment or people automatically complying with their expectations. Is interpersonally exploitative, meaning they take advantage of others for their needs. Lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with feelings and needs of others. Is often envious of others or believes others are envious of them, and shows arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes. Now, one thing in here that I'll point out is the requirement for excessive admiration. Narcissism is often understood as being a defense mechanism. So somebody in truth has a very fragile sense of self. They have a very fragile sense of who they are, their self-importance, their self-esteem, And so narcissism comes in to protect them from that. And so there is often this sense of need for a lot of attention, a lot of admiration. They might point out their successes or things that they want you to notice. They could be big or they could be small. They can be like, hey, look I put this on. I put the paper towel back on the roll instead of just putting it on the counter. You're like, great. Would you like a cookie? So there's like this excessive admiration that is required by people who are quite narcissistic. And it is because they are trying to get that reinforcement, because in truth, their sense of self is very, very fragile under the surface. Now, you can most certainly have personality traits of narcissism without having a full-blown personality disorder. And I think in general, when most people talk about narcissism, they're thinking of somebody who is self-absorbed, they have an inflated sense of self-importance, and a lack of consideration for other people in general. Narcissism isn't the same as just being an asshole, right? Narcissism is a specific constellation of traits and symptoms, and that doesn't just mean being a jerk. So I just want to clarify that. Okay, before we move on, I want to take a quick moment and thank our sponsor. This week we are sponsored by BetterHelp. I am thinking a lot these days about, caring for yourself versus caring for others. This is relevant in my own life. It's also relevant in people that I'm working with, but you need to be able to care for yourself as well as caring for others. And if you're in a helping sort of role like me, it's very easy to get caught up in what everybody else needs and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. And when we spend all of our time on giving, it leads us, to feeling stretched thin and possibly burned out. So therapy is a really good tool to help you find more balance in your life. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online and it's supposed to be convenient and flexible, suited to your schedule no matter where you are. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and that'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. And if you need to switch therapists at any time, you can do so for no additional charge. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Check out betterhelp.com/duff today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/duff. Okay, let's get back to the question. Another thing in your question that you asked is the traumatic brain injury. And this is a very interesting wrinkle here. You mentioned that your boyfriend was in a severe car accident as a teenager, and it seems like that stunted his emotional development. Now, this is totally speculation because I obviously haven't seen his MRIs or know anything about his situation. But one possibility here is that the frontal lobes of his brain, which are the lobes of your brain like just behind your forehead, were damaged in the accident. And this happens often in car accidents due to a direct blow to that part of the head, or from the brain rebounding against the skull in what we call a contra coup injury. Meaning if your head flies forward, right, your brain is going to stay still until it hits the back of your head or the back of your skull, and then it's going to bounce forward. And that bouncing back and forth can cause injuries, can cause brain injuries, even if that isn't the particular part of your head that you hit. In the frontal lobe, we also have these spiny projections around our nasal cavity that serve as really, really good pokey things for our brain to crash into. And so we often see, even when somebody doesn't hit their forehead, say on the steering wheel or something like that, they might still have a frontal lobe brain injury. The reason I'm mentioning this as a possibility is that the frontal lobes govern impulse control, personality, social appropriateness, and all sorts of other aspects of behavior. And in my clinical experience, somebody with a frontal lobe brain injury can often behave in ways that seem very similar to a teenager, much younger than they actually are. So I've had people in my office who have had frontal lobe brain injuries that maybe are very, very irritable, easily set off. I've had people walk off in the middle of testing or in the middle of giving them feedback, like, fuck this, I'm out of here, whatever, you're dumb. They might be just sort of immature in their interaction style. So imagine, say, like a 7-year-old person being like, yeah, bro, you know what? Like, I'm just, talking to the honeys down at the store and, I'm thinking that I might like get one home and blah, 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 right? Something that's just totally not consistent with their age and where they are in life. You might have somebody who's flirtatious or giggly, people who are risk takers, again, in a way that's not consistent with their age, wanting to do things that are just very much thrill-seeking that you would expect of a teenager, but not somebody in their 60s or 70s. So there's a lot of different presentations that you can have with frontal lobe injuries, but it's definitely a possibility here. Something to consider is whether these behaviors that you're talking about are new ones or old ones, because typically a traumatic brain injury It involves an initial healing process. So say he got the car accident and then over the next year or two, you see a big improvement, right? Maybe there are some huge skills that were knocked out initially. Maybe he had trouble concentrating or trouble working, communicating, even walking or doing physical things. But that's going to improve. And as you said, he improved basically to the point of only having a limp, which means his brain made a really good recovery. After that recovery period, then you're expected to be essentially fairly stable over the years. And so we wouldn't expect it to suddenly get a lot worse decades down the line. I say that, but there are some exceptions. One complicating factor in this case is age. So you mentioned that he is how old? 59. So he's 60. So he's not too old. But research does indicate that a history of traumatic brain injury increases the risk of developing something like a degenerative condition. So say Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal degeneration, a disease process that actually sort of eats away at the brain. Having a history of a brain injury increases your risk of developing that. So if you feel like this could be a factor, I would definitely say that you can encourage him or you can come with him and talk to his doctor about getting a referral to a neuropsychologist like myself. This is what I do in my day job. And, as a neuropsychologist, what I would want to do is look at his cognitive abilities, meaning memory and language, but also especially what we call executive functioning. These are the skills that are associated with the frontal lobes of the brain. And these involve things like filtering out distractions, planning ahead instead of being impulsive, filtering out distractions. Did I mention that already? I think I did. Multitasking, all sorts of things like that. So just basically the higher level thinking skills. We might also test things like impulse control. And then, of course, working with somebody for several hours also helps somebody in a position like mine to get a feel for somebody through the interview and testing process. And that can be very, very helpful. So those are all things to think about, right? There's the, narcissism aspect. There's the brain injury aspect. Let's table the cognitive issues for now and talk about some other possibilities. As I said, if you have concerns about that, talk to his doctor. But I also think that it may be important to look at the situation and ask yourself what part you play. I'm not trying to point fingers here because I don't know you, but it is an important part of figuring this out to take a good look at yourself. Is there a good reason that he would get in the habit of lying to you? Do you guys tend to have a history of having really big fights or discussions? Do you tend to get angry at him for things that he does that you don't approve of? Right? So, for example, let's say that his doctors told him, you have high cholesterol or because of other issues, you need to cut back on these foods. You need to stop eating so much pizza for the sake of your health so you don't have a heart attack. And so whenever you find out that he's eating these foods that are putting him at risk, you get pissed off. You're like, what are you doing? Your doctor told you this. And, you give him a little verbal haranguing and he's like, ugh, so tired of hearing this, right? If that were the case, it would be very functional for him to lie to you about eating anything for lunch. Even if in that specific instance, you can say to yourself, well, I wouldn't get mad about a piece of pizza over lunch. There is a chance that he would take things that you have been upset at him in the past about and overgeneralize, especially if he's not like the most emotionally in tune person. He might overgeneralize that and say, well, fine, I'm just not going to tell her anything. I don't want to get in trouble. Again, speculation here. I don't know if that's the case or not, but it's something to consider. And then, in terms of overgeneralizing, I also think we should acknowledge that it's a bit of a leap to say that there must be millions of other lies that he's told and that he's probably lying when he says nice things about you. Don't forget that he's still there with you. He's still in the relationship. Nobody's forcing him to be there with you. Clearly, there are reasons that he wants to be in this relationship and that he's still there with you. So don't doubt that he cares about you or that he thinks you're beautiful or that you're great. There's no reason to take one thing, which is the lying and the other stuff, and think that that means he doesn't actually care. I understand the impulse to do that because you're like, well, everything must be a lie. You feel very off kilter. What's real? What's not? But that's a big leap. As I say to my therapy patients, that's not putting the cart in front of the horse. That's launching the cart out into space. We have no idea if that could be true or not. So that's just wild speculation that we don't need to get into. But for your situation, I think it may be important to clarify and be specific with yourself about whether he is lying, like overtly lying, or just avoiding talking about things. So for instance, the mortgage with his ex-wife, maybe he hid that from you because he was worried about your reaction. Pretty reasonable, right? If you would have said, why are you doing that? That's ridiculous. You should not be co-signing on a mortgage with her. Then if he wants to do that thing, he's going to have to hide it from you. That's different from lying straight to your face about it and saying, I never signed that document. And then you're like, I have it right here. You signed the document. You're lying to me. Right? So those are different things. You could be upset about either one. You're allowed to be pissed off if he's keeping things from you or if he's just lying straight to your face. But I think it's an important clarification for you. And in addition, I have some questions for you. So one, has anybody else pointed this out? Do other people in his life, family, friends, what have you, do they notice that he lies about inconsequential things? Does he treat other people the same way, or is this just to you? Do you see that other people are noticing this pattern in your relationship? Has anybody pointed out to you that they see him lying to you and things like that? I would also ask if this has been brought up as a specific topic, not necessarily in terms of, confronting an individual lie that you catch, but as a broader issue. I think that the term lying can be very charged and sometimes place somebody on the defensive, but you could say something like, I'm concerned about something. From my perspective, it seems like you often tell me one thing, and then later on I find out that it wasn't true. And this is usually about little things like whether you ate lunch, but it worries me. Do you notice this? Do you notice that this happens? What do you make of it? Why is this happening? Just opening that up, trying to have a very honest conversation about the issue, if possible, if he doesn't shut down and not want to talk to you about it. I would say that it's pretty hard to give you great advice without knowing exactly what's going on. It could be that you're falling into a similar pattern of what his ex-wife experienced. It could be that he's a very dishonest person and you just haven't picked up on it, or you've been maybe in a bit of, denial, ignoring the signs for all these years. But it's also equally possible that he has a brain injury that makes him act in these ways when he has no insight into the fact that he's doing it or why it might be problematic. That would lead to those what's the difference statements, like he really doesn't understand the difference there. And depending on the answers here, it would lead to different follow-up actions, right? So maybe you guys need to get into therapy and address your communication and other issues you talked about here. Or maybe instead you need to educate yourself more about his condition and work on being patient and adjusting expectations. Maybe you need to have hard talks about boundaries. Unfortunately, a lot of this depends on what the answer here is, so I just hope that I'm cueing some helpful thoughts for you. One of the last things that I'll mention here is that within your age range, in your later 50s to 60s, you can start to get some sensory loss, such as hearing loss. And that can be a big factor because it can seem like a memory problem or a language problem or even behavioral issues, right? You might have somebody who is not really hearing everything you're asking and responding to a little bit different of a question than the actual one that you presented to them. And I think you also may want to consider his other behaviors, look at his whole situation and determine, does he have any other sort of impulse control issues? For instance, other types of diet or purchases or leisure activities that would indicate he has a hard time holding back his impulses. What I mean is, maybe he's ordering tons of stuff from Amazon and returning it, or ordering out a ton when you have plenty of food in the house, things like that. Also, does he lack a social filter when he's in a situation with other people? Does he have any filter when he talks, or does he just say what's on his mind in an inappropriate way? I would say also sometimes frontal lobe injuries make people super horny and obsessed with having frequent sex, which I only thought about because of the start of your question. It can be, a positive thing at times if you're a very sexual person, but other times it's like, whoa, buddy, like this is a lot, right? So another thing to think about that can happen with frontal lobe injuries, if that's what we're looking at here. But again, I can't give you all the specific advice you're hoping for, but I hope this is enough to get you started. I hope that you can find some answers and maybe even some resolution soon. So good luck to you. All right, so let's move on to question 2 here. It reads, Hi, Def. Firstly, I just started listening to your podcast recently as I'm hoping to make some changes in my life that help me handle my emotions in a healthy manner. So thank you for your podcast. Now, on to my question. So I'm 22 years old and have a younger sister who is 7. I recently have been trying to look into why I feel the way I feel at times, and I've realized that a lot of my negative emotions and coping mechanisms come from my childhood, along with other traumas gained along the way. I watch my mom raising my younger sister, and I'm so worried about the future of her mental health and emotional development. My sister, like I said, is a child. She will break things or make a mess and have a lot of energy at times. Yet for some reason, these things that are normal for a child make my mom so mad sometimes. My mom constantly compares my sister to me because I was the good child, meaning I would tread lightly and hide things like bad grades because I was always afraid of my mom's unpredictable and sometimes intense reactions. I want my mom to be more understanding and gentle with my sister because I don't want her to struggle with mental health and emotions and have to figure out how to grow and heal like I'm doing now. I don't want my sister to try to be like me or compare herself to me constantly because my mom wants her to be more behaved like I was. I can see the way it affects my sister already, like how she constantly apologizes for every little thing my mom says something about, or when she cried to me saying, "I just want mom to be okay," when my mom was screaming about something my sister had accidentally done. I'm struggling with figuring out how to confront my mom about this. I still struggle with sticking up to her because I still fear her reaction like I did as a child, but I can't let her harm my sister the way she did to me. So I guess my question is, what do I do? Thank you so much. Okay, hello, and thank you for the really good question. I think it's very sweet that you care so much about your sister that you would ask something like this. You two have quite the age gap. 22, was it? Yeah, 22 and 7. That's quite a big age gap. And I think what that means is you have an interesting opportunity to be more of a mentor and play more of a guiding role in her life, which is, really special. I have a 7-year-old, so my oldest son is 7, and you're totally right when you mention that they can sometimes be wild, disruptive, inconvenient. Lately, my 7-year-old has been having serious, attitude challenges and has been pushing boundaries. And while it's sometimes annoying or hard to keep your cool about, it's also totally developmentally appropriate. So, as a parent, it's normal to become angry or lose your composure sometimes, but there's a certain level of that that's reasonable. And, as long as you're trying to not do that, you're probably in good shape. But it sounds clear that you feel your mom is outside of that reasonable range, and that makes you feel very uncomfortable because you know what you've been through. Also, that comparison thing you mentioned, that very much is not okay. I'm not the parenting police here, but, comparing a child to the good child in the family is a great way to cause some serious self-concept issues, doing the good kid, bad kid sort of thing. And that's just icky. So I'm glad you're picking up on that. I'm very, very proud of you for being able to recognize the situation, for being able to step back and look at your own past and see why you were considered to be, the good kid and, not a problem because you were so scared of her. You made yourself small, and you don't want your sister to have to be small. I hear that. But it's scary, right? You must be really conflicted because you want to confront your mother about this, but you're still scared of her at the same time. Along with all of that, you're just so concerned about your sister and her well-being, and you want to take care of her. I think that one thing you absolutely need to remember is that her situation is inherently different from yours because she has you. I'm assuming that when you were growing up, from the way you worded your question, you didn't have somebody like this. You didn't have somebody in a position where they could be on your side to help you understand that you're not bad, you're not crazy, to provide perspective and make sure you don't lose that sense of self. You never had that. You had to figure it out on your own, and a lot of that's happening now after the fact. So I'm sure that if you had somebody back then who was in your life who was able to reassure you and give you context for why your mom acted so strongly, to tell you it's not your fault, to tell you that, you're not a bad person, you probably would have been spared some of the turmoil in your mental health that you've had as a teen and a young adult. So you have an opportunity here, but I don't want you to think that you have to be her parent. It's just an opportunity to help her in the way that maybe only a sister can. You don't need to take over for your mom, but you need to be there as a sister. You can talk to her. You can help her understand in language that's appropriate for her age. That'll change over time, but in, right now, 7-year-old language, you can tell her that it's not her fault, that sometimes mom can be loud or intense, that all kids make mistakes, and that doesn't mean that they're bad little people. You can remind her and show her that she's a good kid, that you're proud of her, that she doesn't need to feel ashamed. Her brain, her body, they're still growing, and nobody does everything right all the time. And you can tell her that she can always come to you if there's trouble, even if it's with mom. I think that another thing that you can do here is to make sure that she is getting the chance to experience things outside of the house. I don't know what the situation looks like for you guys, but if she's a bit isolated, that's something to watch out for. It's very, very healthy for her to see that there are lots of different family styles, lots of different family interactions, and that will help her get perspective on her situation as well. Additionally, having solo time with you can also be great, right? To just show her that, there are contexts where she can be herself. And, I'm sure you have your own threshold. You're maybe not patient with her all the time, but you really care about her having a good experience. And so having that one-on-one time with you is also a great thing. If you do want to talk to your mom about this and confront her in some way, I would advise you to try to approach it from an empathetic lens. Given what you've said, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that your mom might have some mental health challenges. And so if you could lead with empathy, that would be best, to say that, you recognize that she is overloaded, that she seems stressed. You can mention that you're not trying to tell her how to parent, but point out the things that you've noticed, right? You've noticed that your sister is getting down on herself, that you've heard her apologizing for things that don't seem like things she should be apologizing for, that you've heard a lot of intensity in their conversations lately, things like that. It's not going to be a comfortable conversation, and she may be defensive or angry at you. But I do think that the approach of trying to lead with empathy could be more useful than being accusatory and angry and trying to kind of put her in her place. As we know, your mom doesn't react very well to certain things, and so that would just be probably kind of a blinding conflict that wouldn't have any resolution. But in the end, I think that you're going to be able to make a much bigger difference with your sister than you would be able to with your mom. You can help your sister feel stable and connected during a time when she may be at risk of feeling like a burden or feeling like somebody who doesn't belong. There's no perfect way to go about this, but I think that you have your mind and heart in the right place. You care for her deeply, and she's better off because of it. So, in summary, be there for her as best as you can. Remember that she's in a different position than you were, so the risks aren't the same. And if you feel like talking to your mom, try to lead with an empathetic approach, even if you do have a lot of internal judgment about the way that she's acting. So thank you for the question. Short answer there, but hopefully that's helpful. And with that, that is the end of the episode, everybody. This has been episode 349 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. Hopefully I didn't stumble over my words too much. I am pretty exhausted, but it was important for me to address these really, really good questions. If you guys want to send in a question for the show like these listeners, send an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you want to check out the show notes, go to duffthepsych.com/episode 349. And take good care of yourselves this weekend. I'll see you for the next episode. Bye.